Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa on France 24. Here are the stories making headlines across the continent this evening. Political operations are suspended in Chad after a violent crackdown on protests leaves around 50 people dead. Interim leader Debby's term was up on Thursday, but was recently extended by 2 years. During Breast Cancer Awareness Month, we'll take you to Nigeria, where many women see a cancer diagnosis as a death sentence. Our team heads to a clinic to meet those facing sky-high prices as they battle their illnesses. And as African artists showcase at the also known as Africa Art Fair here in Paris, we'll speak to artist Nnenna Okore, who uses bioplastics and waste to send a message of ecology through her work. Good to have you with us. Tensions eased in Chad on Friday following an unprecedented day of violence on Thursday. Around 50 protesters were killed during clashes with police as people demonstrated against interim leader Debby extending his term by 2 years. The government put in place a curfew and on Friday suspended 7 opposition political parties as it put an end to political operations for 3 months. Thursday would have been Debby's end of term, with the Prime Minister calling the unrest an attempted coup, but the UN called for restraint.
Defense and security forces must refrain from the use of force against peaceful protesters and ensure that force is not used unless strictly necessary, and if so, in full compliance with the principles of legality, proportionality, and precaution. All those detained for exercising their rights to peaceful assembly must be promptly released.
Ibrahim Traore has officially been sworn in as Burkina Faso's interim president, with the 34-year-old pledging to oversee the nation's transition to civilian rule in July 2024. At a ceremony in the capital, he doubled down on his reasons for leading last month's coup, the country's second this year, saying our aims are none other than the reconquest of territory occupied by these hordes of terrorists. Traore highlighted the threat that jihadist violence in the north poses to the country, adding Burkina's very existence is in danger. Well, this year, 29 countries have reported cholera outbreaks. That includes 18 in Africa, a significant rise on previous years. The outbreaks have led to a shortage in cholera vaccines, forcing the World Health Organization to shift temporarily to a 1-dose vaccination program instead of the usual 2. It says 1 dose is still effective against the disease. With more, here's our correspondent Sam Bradpiece reporting from Dakar.
Africa is home to the majority of countries to have been afflicted by cholera outbreaks so far in 2022. In the West African region alone, we can count Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger and Nigeria among the countries to have been afflicted by this deadly disease. A lack of access to clean water is undoubtedly a key factor, and both flooding and drought can play into this. On Thursday, the Africa CDC warned that climate change could be, at least in part, responsible for outbreaks currently being seen in several countries across the continent. Now, normally when such outbreaks occur, international health authorities like the World Health Organization send vaccines to be delivered in 2 doses to affected populations. But because of the rise of cholera outbreaks across the world this year, there is now a dire shortage in vaccines. And on Wednesday, the World Health Organization put out a statement saying that in cases of cholera outbreaks, only 1 dose of vaccine would be delivered. This forcibly means that the protection offered is less. The World Health Organization has warned that urgent action is needed to ramp up global production of cholera vaccines.
Sam Bradpiece reporting from Dakar there. In Nigeria, a diagnosis of breast cancer is considered by many women to be a death sentence. In a country where social security is largely non-existent, the prohibitive cost of treatment is usually borne by the patients, with some receiving donations from their religious institutions or via ads that they put out on the radio or TV. Our correspondent Chinwe Osundu reports.
Every second is a real emergency for Dr. Femi Olayele. Between screening, treatment and follow-up, his days are very busy. 80,000 women have registered in his center, which specializes in the fight against breast cancer. This health project manager is rarely in his office because he conducts the 30 weekly interventions scheduled on his agenda.
If I cannot attempt to remove that nodule at that size, that will keep growing. God forbid it's cancerous. If it's cancerous, that's bad news for the woman. And it's very, very upsetting that a lot of women I could have helped with my procedures and what I do here don't get the help they need.
In this Lagos car park, Chioma occupies a space of barely 2 square meters. Cured of breast cancer, she sells second-hand clothes here. She was diagnosed with tumors last year. Although she was insolvent, this mother of 3 was able to pay 3,500 euros for her treatment, thanks to a donation campaign via WhatsApp.
It wasn't easy. Even to have daily meal was so difficult because of the treatment I'm undergoing. I spent a lot of money, but thank God today.
Dr. Femi's foundation was the strongest link in saving Chioma. Nearly 80% of women with breast cancer die in Nigeria. Officially, 26,000 new cases are detected each year. But these figures are far below the reality because of the lack of specialized medical facilities.
Really, truly, on a national scale, it's like I'm just scratching the surface. Because a service like this is needed in every single local government of Nigeria. Because there are women everywhere. The country of a population of 200 million. What can a single doctor do? We need a dedicated cancer screening service for our women, which will be funded and should be funded from a national budget.
After 10 years of practice as a doctor in the UK, Dr. Femi resigned his job to return to Nigeria. And since 2008, he has been fighting daily to increase the life expectancy of Nigerian women living with breast cancer.
There's something on the floor.
Well, this weekend, Paris is playing host to the 7th edition of the also known as Africa Art Fair, a gathering aimed at celebrating the art emerging from the continent and those who have a connection to it. Over 100 artists will have their works on display, with workshops and lectures also programmed. Well, we're thrilled to have one of those artists with us tonight. Award-winning Nigerian-Australian Nnenna Okore works with a variety of materials, covering everything from sculptures to historical landmarks. She joins me now. Nnenna, thank you for being here with us on France 24. You yourself have led a very international life, having lived between Australia and Nigeria, now based in the US. How much has that mixture of African and Western perceptions influenced your art?
Thank you very much for having me on the program. I think that it has been quite influential in many ways, having lived in Nigeria or being raised in Nigeria to also living in the United States. Of course, being in Africa, I was influenced by the natural environment, the culture, and the people. And then moving on to the United States also, there are so many influences from the exposure and the rich connection with people that have also helped to shape how I see and how I make work. So I think it has been quite a useful and rich experience for me to have these different opportunities across different parts of the world.
Yeah, very vastly different cultures as well.
Right, yes.
Your recent art uses different materials, including bioplastics, to speak towards ecology. What sparked your fascination in that field?
For a long time, I've been really concerned with the amount of waste outputs that come from ad production and from the African environment in general. And so I've been agitating for an opportunity to think about the materials we use and think about how the ecological implications are affecting the planet of our materials. And so I decided that I was going to develop a new material, or at least I was going to try to work with what is being called bioplastic now, that has to do with using food matter, organic matter, to create art materials. And that enables me to eschew having to create waste production in my art. So the work can actually be recycled. It can be returned to nature, so to speak. So I think it's helpful to think in those manners, because the ecological issues we face today are a huge problem for the world. And we need to be thinking about that in our art-making processes as well.
We've seen some of the examples of some of your work behind us here. You've been showing some of these pieces at the also known as Africa Art Fair, which is taking place, as I said, in Paris this weekend. How important are events like this to highlight art emerging from the continent?
I think it is so vital because art, African art in the West, I think, really helps to bring a non-Western voice to the art discourse. And I think that for a long time, mainstream art has been really highlighting a lot of Western philosophies and Western ideologies and standards of art. And when we Africans bring our voice to the table, I think it diversifies the information you get. It really brings a true picture to what Africa can bring to the table, that we also have some knowledge and we also have art that is sparking a lot of debate and is bringing a lot of different kinds of thinking to the table. So I think these are vital and essential moments in history that we need to be applauding.
Just quickly, we've seen a lot in recent years about Western nations repatriating African artworks to the continent. How important is art in telling the history and culture of Africa?
Very important. I think that this is a really applaudable move by the West to consider repatriating these works back to the continent, because I think that, as you know, art is life in Africa. And so when you take away part of what makes life in Africa, it breaks the cycle. And so we need to make sure that we keep what belongs to Africa in Africa, to keep that conversation and that lifestyle going.
Well, hopefully keep more of those repatriations happening over the coming years. Nnenna, thank you so much for joining us here on France 24. I hope you have a wonderful time over the weekend at the also known as Africa conference. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for this edition of Eye on Africa here on France 24. Do stay tuned, though. There's more news coming up.
Cuando vas a la playa, piensa en la arena, las vacaciones, bañarse en el mar. Y yo cuando veo la playa, me recuerda a los levantamientos.
Each year, hundreds of migrants die trying to reach Europe by crossing the Mediterranean. Forensic specialists, undertakers and Red Cross workers struggle to identify deceased and missing persons.
Nació en Alger el día 22 de octubre del 89, casado el chico, y que en este caso se contactó con el hermano.
The procedures are complicated and lengthy, sometimes taking weeks to return bodies to their home countries and loved ones. Watch Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.